Thank you.
It's great to be with you all today. Just as a little bit of background, I served as pulpit supply for the Slater Christian Church in Slater, Missouri for about 6 years, starting towards the end of 2017. And since then, I've been commissioned in the Christian Church Disciples of Christ, and I'm now currently pastor at the Arrow Rock Federated Church. And so my conversation with you today takes a little different turn than Colleen's in that I'm going to share with you two church buildings where the ministry retired and how we got to that point and how the buildings are currently used. So I'm going to start with the historic Christian Church. And we're going to dive a little bit into the history of it. And I'm going to start by saying that, she was a devout and a very faithful Campbellite. Born in Kentucky in 1825, Nanny Jane Toole married John P. Seitz Jr. in 1841 in Boonville, Missouri. John, who was born in Virginia in 1821, was not a religious man at all. He was good-natured, yet he used his mouthpiece as a gateway for profanity. Now, this opposite attracting couple made their first home in Cooper County before they moved to Arrow Rock in 1844, where John set up a gunsmith shop. That shop is still an active gun shop today. You should come see it sometime. Their only son, Charles, who was born in 1844, died in 1855. And after his death, Nanny and John opened their home in Arrow Rock up to orphans. And the success of this gunsmith shop really propelled the couple into the middle class of the day. Now, Arrow Rock was formally incorporated in 1829, and it was home to many wealthy antebellum plantation owners whose primary crop was hemp, as well as successful business owners who had given the town as the jumping off point for the Santa Fe Trail. Many businesses flourished. So John really adored Nanny, even though he wasn't a religious dude. He did everything he could to provide, with his success, to provide for her. He expanded their brick home, he raised the roof, added some rooms. He created a Victorian-style porch. He made sure that it was furnished with fineries from St. Louis that really epitomized the Victorian era. And she was a very delicate woman. She was described as being very handsome and tidy. She was very fashionable. She was really the apple of his eye. But there was something missing for her. The Baptists, the Methodists, and the Presbyterians had all established congregations early in Arrow Rock's history. Yet, as a devoted and a very faithful Campbellite, Nanny really longed to worship with like-minded Christians. And the closest Stone Campbell church was called the Lamine Church of Christ, which was established in 1843, but it was 8 miles away in Cooper County. And although John and Nanny didn't make the trip weekly to worship, they did attend the annual revivals that were held by the church. And at one of the revivals, the evangelist, along with Nanny, had made such an impression on John that he gave his life to Christ and was baptized, and he joined the church. And then he came back home to Arrow Rock and decided, hey, we need to build a Christian church. So in 1872, they donated the land for this building that you're looking at. There were several other families that helped, but they built this Church of Christ building. And the charter to unite, forming a congregation, was signed in April of 1872. And it's interesting because on the charter, the men sign on the left side and the women sign on the right side. And John was appointed as a deacon. Now, Nanny died in 1900, John passed away in 1904, and it's unclear if the Arrow Rock Church of Christ became a disciples congregation, a Christian church after their death. However, we do know that in February of 1910, a Mason Hamlin organ was delivered by the Parks Music House from Hannibal, Missouri to Arrow Rock, thus clarifying its move towards a disciples-type congregation, and it split the church. And they put a compromise in place at the time that allowed the organ to be played before church service and after the church service. but not during the church service. And so the congregation remained active until the 1920s, and then the Great Depression took its toll on Arrow Rock like it did so many places. Population declined, so did the size of the congregation. And when a tree fell across the church's roof in 1937, there weren't enough resources to repair it. So in 1942, some members of the Saline County Conference of Christian Churches tried to get the roof repaired. However, since it wasn't an active church with regular meetings, they couldn't obtain the necessary time priorities to authorize the repair materials. And then in 1947, they tried again, and a plan was approved to fix the roof and some other damages that had occurred in that decade. And services did resume in May of 1948. Evening services continued once a month until August of 1949, when the congregation joined together with the Baptist and the Methodist in town, forming the Arrow Rock Federated Church, which is the church that I now pastor. In 1961, the Christian Church's last living elder and trustee led an effort to preserve this building you're looking at. The Arrow Rock Craft Club began the restoration of the building in 1962 under a 5-year lease agreement with the Christian Church Disciples of Christ of Mid-America, whatever it was called at the time. And then in 1982, the Friends of Arrow Rock, which is a preservation and education non-for-profit, entered into a 99-year lease with the Christian Church Disciples of Christ of Mid-America. They completed additional renovations and they put furnishings in so that it would be somewhat like it was during John and Nanny's time of worship there. And today, the church is used to interpret church-going in the mid to late 19th century. It's also used for special events, for special worship services. It's a destination building for weddings. It's fully air-conditioned and heated. Part of the renovations included that. So that's an example from a historic perspective, how one of our buildings transitioned from a place of regular worship to a place of interpretation of worship, as well as some special events. And now I'd like to turn our attention to a more recent story where the Slater Christian Church moved from being a church to a gathering place. It was originally known as the Mount Zion Christian Church, and it was organized in 1865 with a church building completed in 1866 at a cost of $2,000. And the congregation continued to worship in this frame building until 1878, when it moved to 2 corner lots in what's downtown Slater, Missouri. That was a newly organized town, and so that's where the current building is located. And initial membership in Mount Zion was about 40 people, and the first church building was sold. And then in 1890, a new building was erected, and on this lot where you see this current building. But in 1936, that building was destroyed by fire, and this present building that you're looking at was built for the cost of $20,000. And part of the 158-year legacy of the church is that there are a lot of Timothys and Phoebes that were sent out into ministry. Yet in disciples' tradition, beyond this legacy, there was a lot of work done to train many lay leaders and teachers and musicians and pastors, support staff. And when you consider the multiplier effect of all these disciples, thousands upon thousands of human lives have been impacted by the ministry work that took place here at Slater Christian Church. But on June 25th of 2023, the decision was made to close the ministry. And at the meeting, a committee of 3 folks were appointed to work through the process of what closing would look like. A commitment to open communication with participating and non-participating members was made. And then later in the summer, it was decided that the last worship service at Slater Christian Church would be on December 31st of 2023. And as a member of that committee, and I was serving as sort of the lead pulpit supply, if you will, I reached out to Kirby Gould, who's the vice president of the Christian Church Foundation. She was a longtime colleague of mine. She chaired my ministry support team, and she really provided a lot of digital resources and some attorney recommendations for us to move through this process of retiring a ministry. And we adopted a key guiding question from the Christian Church Foundation's Sacred Stories publication that many of you may be familiar with. Highly recommend it. And here's that question. What is the most faithful, effective, and efficient use of our assets for God's mission? Now, inspired by the story the Reverend Daryl Manson shared in Sacred Stories, as you read through it, you find his story, we created another question to help guide us in the process. And then that question was, as our ministry comes to an end, can a new ministry be born? So with those questions as sort of guidepost, we created an asset distribution policy. We debated the merits of selling the building, gifting the building, or we even considered demolishing the building. Initially, we decided to demolish the building after trudging through so many emotions. We communicated with the contact list, we got bids for the demolition, and then we were approached by a real estate company to actually take over the building. And then we were approached by another congregation that they wanted to take over the building. So we consulted with a local attorney, and his advice was, oh, just shut down and don't worry about it. Nobody will know the difference. Well, that didn't set well with the committee nor with the leaders of the church. So we consulted with Ed Holderly of Spencer Fane in the St. Louis office. And we had to have multiple conversations because we were organized as a Chapter 352 benevolent organization, not a Chapter 355 not-for-profit corporation, which meant it was going to be harder for us to close down the ministry. So we spent a lot of time converting to a 355 nonprofit corporation, which allowed us to shut down more efficiently without any liabilities. And it took a long time because we didn't get everything closed up until the end of 2024. And I think Susan Moore is going to actually include a photo in an upcoming issue of the newsletter for the Mid-America Disciples, because part of our asset distribution was to create an endowment named the Slater Christian Church Rural Ministry Endowment that will support the work of rural ministry networks throughout Missouri. But it's really important as we were moving through the decision to close the church to consider what ministry could continue. And so the distribution of assets was to continue the ministries that were in place. So we distributed to many of the missions that we had supported as an active congregation, and then we set up this endowment. We also had to look at the physical properties that we owned, and we ultimately gifted the building to a community foundation that was established to receive the building. It's now called the Gathering Place, and it's open for senior citizen activities, youth activities. They've created a couple of apartments so that people who are caring for the building can live there. And so now it's a more active community center that has outreach in that regard. We worked a lot on our legacy. So we went through church documents, minutes from church meetings. We worked really well with the Disciples of Christ Historical Society and sent so much information to them for them to include in their collection. We also had to work through the Disciples Extension Fund to really look at the different options legally that we could do as we were looking to gift this to the community foundation. So the last slide I have are some resources and things that you may want to consider if you are guiding a congregation that has to go through this painful process of retiring the ministry, if you will, or closing the ministry. I know I talked fast, but I wanted to try to keep us on schedule as much as possible. So I think if you have any questions, this is my direct contact information if you'd like. to reach out to me. And I don't know if Colleen's still on the call to take questions.